Hello and welcome to Economic Talks with Raed. I'm Raed Safadi. I am currently a partner and chief economist at Whiteshield, a public policy consultancy firm, and AI economics. So we keep with the times. In our series here, our Economic Talks, we invite leading scholars, thinkers, policymakers, people who actually have bright ideas to talk about, the engines, the drivers behind economic prosperity. In this episode, we're going to talk with Sergei Guriev, a leading scholar in political economy, contract theory, and institutions. You are currently the Dean of the London Business School. Formerly, you were the Chief Economist of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. And I am really honored to have you here to talk about, the title that we chose is Beyond Money, More Than Money. Today, in More Than Money, what really drives growth, I'm honored to sit with Professor Sergei Guriev, currently the Dean of London Business School. I am honored to sit with you, sir, and I welcome you to our Economic Talks. Sergei, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Raed, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be with Whiteshield, old friends and partners in those policy-making exercises. I've been working with Fadi Farah and other partners in Whiteshield for many years.
Fantastic. Good that we're old friends, and it will be a friendly chat here. So I want to get all the insights I can get out of you. And let me start with, by looking at your career. When you look back, what is the one insight that actually made a difference in terms of your thinking, in terms of the ideas that you promulgated and then, that you shared with policymakers, with institutions, multilateral institutions, with students now, right? So what is that one insight that changed your thinking?
Thank you, Raed. So I've had several careers. As you said, I'm an academic economist. I'm also an academic leader. Right now, I run an institution, a London Business School. I ran universities before. And I'm also a policymaker. I've been a policymaker, I've been the chief economist of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. And that episode in my career was actually very instructive. I traveled around the world. I talked to policymakers around the world. And I saw that every country says we are unique. Lessons from other countries don't apply. But actually they do. And actually when you see that every country is unique, and it is true, you need to take into account context. You need to take into account history and culture. And yet there are many ideas that you can take from one country and apply to another country. And this is what organizations like EBRD do. And this is what consultancy firms like Whiteshield do, cross-pollinating best experience, but also learning from mistakes and pitfalls.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So let me carry forward, and I'm going to use one of your quotes here, right? Where you say actually, economic growth is not just about capital and labor. It is also about trust and institution. That is really a striking quote that I use. So, in your mind, why do you shift from the traditional approach that economists, I'm not trying to accuse any, focus basically on labor and capital, and now you talk about other things that matter and matter as much.
I think indeed economic research has changed a lot in the recent decades. If you go to textbooks published 30 years ago, they will talk about capital, labor, total factor productivity, and economic factors first and foremost. But in recent decades, people started to talk about culture, social capital, institutions, history, geography, various aspects of human capital. And it's very timely that we talk about those issues because the last Nobel Prize in economics was awarded exactly for working on institutions and the role of institutions in economic growth and development to Daron Acemoglu, Simon Johnson, and James Robinson. These are the people who published groundbreaking research 25 years ago, wrote a book in 2012, Why Nations Fail, continued to work on those issues. They are not alone. I've also worked on those issues with my co-authors in London Business Schools and other institutions. These are very important factors that bring people together, provide incentives for people to create new ideas and innovate in particular. And of course, innovation is an important source of productivity growth and rising incomes.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. That's so insightful. Now, let's think about one ingredient in building institutions for good governance. What is that one ingredient that people talk about that we are unable, at least I am unable so far as an economist, to capture, which is trust?
Right, you point at the right direction. There are many factors that drive good governance, but indeed, if you lose trust in public sector, if you lose trust in government, that creates a vicious circle. Government needs to carry out reforms. Government needs to implement and deliver transformational projects. And in doing so, it needs trust from the people and support from the people. As a political leader, I need to be able to tell you, that's going to be a painful change, but we'll get the benefits. And people need to trust me on that the pain they're going through right now, the change which is causing this pain, is actually for their own benefit, not for my own benefit as a member of the ruling elite. And this is why trust is so important. If I don't have trust, I cannot actually deliver reforms. If I don't deliver reforms, I will not regain trust. And this vicious circle is so important. Once you lose trust, you actually lose the capacity to build good institutions, reform institutions, and therefore create conditions for prosperity and growth.
Thank you so much. Now, I think about it in the issue of trust in the current geopolitical environment, right? How does one actually begin to? I mean, what I take from this, it's very easy to destroy trust, and it's very difficult to build trust. So, how do we start by building it?
Right. There is a lot of research on how economic performance and government performance helps building trust and how lack of this performance undermines trust. And because of this vicious circle relationship, two-way causal relationship, it's actually very hard to disentangle. But in the last 15 years, we've had papers, including papers by my colleagues and co-authors and my own papers, where you actually see how quantitatively important this relationship is in both ways. So if incomes are growing, people are more likely to trust the government. If you have a crisis like global financial crisis of 2008, 2009, people actually trust the government less. Let me give you an example of a European crisis. In Europe, we had a very heterogeneous experience in 2008-9 and subsequent austerity policies. So different regions were affected in different ways. And we see that the regions which were affected in a stronger way, where unemployment went up to a greater extent than in other regions within the same country, people would trust national and European politicians less than in other regions. And interestingly, this crisis would not affect trust in each other, trust in church, trust in police, trust in local government. People identified the culprits of this crisis at the national and European level, and they decided that these people don't deserve our trust anymore. And this is something that we've learned, right? So this research, including my own research on this subject, helped governments and ruling elites in Europe understand how dangerous it is to lose trust because you don't invest enough in supporting people who are most vulnerable, who are left behind. And one of the most satisfying moments of my career was to see that during COVID crisis, European governments were very generous, supported the population, especially the most vulnerable population left behind. And we as a community of academics feel very grateful to politicians reading our research, listening to us, and making unprecedented steps in the right direction to support the population during this very difficult crisis of 2020.
In our work, I mean, we are very cognizant and very conscious of the importance of trust and building strong institutions for good governance. But we find it very hard to reflect this in a quantitative, even a qualitative, right? I mean, and that's a challenge, not just for consultants, but for economists, for social scientists, all of this, right? So how do we actually reflect it in our work, and of course in the policy advice that we give?
Usually trust is measured by surveys, right? So that could be a European social survey, World Values Survey, Gallup World Poll, where people are asked, do you have confidence in government? Do you have confidence in the integrity of electoral system, confidence in judiciary system? Do you think your government is honest or corrupt? And so you can actually track those indicators over time. Probably the most recent paper by Tim Besley from London School of Economics and his co-authors looks at all the surveys combined, and he pretty much shows that growth experiences of an individual. If you experience growth, you are more likely to trust government. If you experience stagnation or recession more, you are less likely to experience to have confidence in government. So these measures you can collect from many surveys. Usually questions are similar, scales are similar, so these numbers are comparable. Of course, these are subjective numbers. And one of the things which is changing now is objective versus subjective experience, perceptions. In our own research, we show that as mobile broadband internet spread in the last 15 years and social media became the main platform for distributing information about politics, about leaders, people now are better informed, but they're also better misinformed, if you like, more misinformed. And what we also show that people now are much more critical about their governments. Why? Because social media are more likely to distribute and disseminate and propagate negative information. And so we live in a much more difficult environment for governments today because with the social media being the main platform, it's very hard to keep the trust going because people notice every single mistake, every single misstep gets noticed and becomes viral on social media. So the situation is changing, and in that sense, trust numbers are comparable across country at every given moment. But again, some countries have more social media, some countries have less social media. So we should keep in mind this changing informational environment when we talk about factors that drive trust, and when we compare quantitative measures of trust, we need to take that into account as well.
So fantastic. Let's talk about the flip side of this, right? I mean, with all the information, the ubiquity of this information, data coming, feedback loops coming from, different social media pipelines and what. Can we think of a policy approach that actually, targets, rather than, a one-size-fits-all, but goes into specific, target groups of people, whether we talk about, skilled labor age between 25, 35, we talk about women, in their prime age with low skilled, high skilled. We can now, policymakers have a bigger responsibility with much better tools to actually target those policies. So what do you think, does this actually balance out the responsibilities they have versus the tools they have at their disposal?
Yes, policymakers now have, and especially politicians have, better tools to understand which part of the population is most positive and most negative about their policies and individual policies. You can run those surveys. You can also collect data from online media where you see how people engage, interact, like, and share content. And you can say, indeed, skilled youth in the age of 25 to 30 is most dissatisfied with education or healthcare, for example, and then, or daycare for kids, right? And then you can target those groups. You can think about what can I do better. But once again, I think politicians need to be mindful of the information ecosystem, and not only do things, but also communicate things. Also explain to the public what they're doing right and wrong, be very honest and transparent, because trying to hide things is not an option. We live in a fishbowl now. We live in a glass house. The lack of transparency is the thing which we left in the previous century, and politicians and elites should be aware of that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Now we move to the not just money, right? And we talked about institutions. Now we talk about the role of these institutions in actually promoting innovation. Public institutions. Let's start with the public institutions, and then we can talk about what role they play vis-a-vis also the creation of an innovation environment that is conducive also for the private institutions to come into play. So please enlighten us, Sergei.
Yes. So when we talk about institutions are usually defined as rules of the game, and people sometimes distinguish between formal institutions like laws and regulations, but also informal institutions like social norms. We talked about trust, for example, beliefs, attitudes, what is perceived in a society as good or bad. And of course, formal institutions only work if they're supported and aligned with culture, with informal institutions, with traditions. So trying to impose on transplant something which works in one part of the world into another part of the world without taking into account local traditions and customs may actually backfire. But yet institutions matter. And of course, innovations are especially important. We talked about trust. Trust among relatives is a good thing, because it protects you from external shocks, but it's not enough to promote innovation. Innovation is about taking something new to the market, to a big market, working with people who have very different experience and knowledge, so not part of your nearest circle. And so trusting people you don't know, trusting people you have not grown up with is a very important part of the equation, right? Talking about the role of trust in innovation, but talking about the role of institutions. Institutions create this trust because I trust you because I know that if you cheat, I have a recourse to the legal system. And of course, informal trust is important. It facilitates the exchange, but formal institutions like courts, laws, regulations also support innovation because we can write a contract and we can trust the legal system to enforce this contract. And if you actually look at innovation ecosystem, especially the financial ecosystem supporting innovation from pre-seed, early stage, late stage, IPO, there is a lot of contracting involved. These are very complex contracts, very difficult relationships with all kinds of involved parties, because people trust innovators with their money and they want to see their return. They take risk, but they don't want to take excessive risk. They want to be protected from moral hazard, from opportunistic behavior. And so formal institutions matter for innovation. Innovators have great ideas. They need capital. Capital providers need protection from wrong behavior, and so formal institutions really matter. And this is why we see that most innovating countries are the countries with developed legal system, which in turn help develop financial system. And also these are the countries where intellectual property rights are well protected. Sometimes you don't need patenting to promote innovation. Sometimes other mechanisms are sufficient to promote innovation, but legal system and financial system, which is based on a good legal system, is important. And then, of course, regulation matters. You don't want to over-regulate, but you also want to create regulation that supports innovation. You want to provide innovators with a platform where they can try out their ideas. And in that sense, institutions, of course, matter.
And they do matter. Thank you so much. Now, I'm thinking about all these institutions, the one that you spoke of, and their role in promoting innovation. And then I look at the role of the public sector, and I see that to kickstart, jumpstart innovation and innovation activities in any one economy, right? The public sector comes in and leads, which tells me that there is somewhere a market failure, over and beyond the institutions of good governance, the legal system, the contract, the protection of property rights, and all this, right? There is that other aspect that we see as reflected actually with governments stepping in and driving finances, that driving incubators, driving all of this rather than the private sector. Why is it so?
So, as you said, there are many market failures where government's support and intervention is important. And of course, in innovation, there is a lot of market. These are new sectors where you create new markets. These markets in the beginning are thin. So, give you an example with electric vehicles. It's a great innovation, but you need charging stations, right? And we have gasoline stations around the world. We don't have electric charging stations around the world, and this is a typical example of a market failure, where one single private company has hard time to provide charging stations around the world. The same is with the road network. To have cars on the road, you need roads, and roads are unlikely to be built by one automotive producer, right? So these kind of issues, of course, call for government support and innovation. This is why, in most cases, it is government that provides infrastructure or at least supports infrastructure through various complex private partnership models, because private sector alone cannot provide infrastructure. This is what we call horizontal industrial policy. Governments are not very good in picking winners. So when several innovators come to me being a government bureaucrat, not being an innovator myself, it's very hard for me to say this company is going to win this race and this company is going to lose this race. But what I can do, I can provide them with a platform where they have access to government services in terms of certification, easy access to licensing and deregulation, so they have fewer barriers, access to global market, which is very important. When we talk about innovation, of course, innovation works when you have a bigger market size. This is why we see so many innovators in the United States and China, which have huge local market, home market. But for smaller countries, it's important to have a market size, which is probably the world, and your government should be able to help you to access global markets. That creates incentives to innovate. If I invest in a new idea, a new technology, and I have my city as a market, that's a completely different set of incentives if I have the whole world as a market, because the payoff is so much higher. So that is also the role of the government. The role of the government in terms of horizontal industrial policy is also skills. I come to a country with a new idea. I want to set up a startup. I want to have access to brilliant people. And of course, most of these people will not be trained by me because they have freedom whom to work for. So if I just pay for everybody to get excellent education in this country, the return will be shared with other startups, with other innovators. So it's something that no single private company can do, and education, in most cases, is provided through public sector. This is indeed an example of horizontal industrial policy. But then talking about financial and material support, in order to strengthen the incentives to invest in new technology, government can de-risk those, can insure those, and also can just co-invest, provide different parts of financing, senior tranches, if you like, structure the financing in the way that innovators themselves understand that the risks are partially shared with the government, with the public sector agency. And this is where it's very easy to make a mistake and overprotect, remove the strong incentives to take risk and invest in new technology. So what is important when government supports innovation is always have a market test. You invest at the pre-seed stage. The next stage, when you go for a next round of financing, it's important that it's not just government institution that invests, but it's also a private co-investor. You go to the next stage, you have a venture capitalist with a private funding who co-invests with the government. You go to a late stage, you go to IPO, there is always a market test, a private sector co-investor, which looks at the valuation. Because there are countries which overdo government support and say, we have a government agency to support you at this stage, next stage, and you never face the market test. And at the IPO stage, it's a government bank which buys you out. And then it's just waste of public money if you don't have a private investor who puts the money where their mouth is. And this is something that we know very well, that it's very easy to waste public money in supporting innovation. And countries which do it well always involve private sector at every stage, because yes, there are market failures, but there are also government failures.
Fantastic. This is great insights, right? I mean, how they work in tandem, right? And which brings me actually to the issue of talent. You know, as you rightly pointed out, I mean, talent can be created homegrown or can be imported, right? Can cross borders and stuff. And now there's a, you know, I would think that there is a global competition for talent, right? How can you know, what kind of a incentive scheme structure can we build so that we can attract talent and more of the talent and the right talent?
I think what you just said is very important, and this is, in historical terms, it's new. So we now live in an environment where high-skilled people are globally mobile. That was not the case 200 years ago. In the last 200 years, transportation costs went down dramatically, which has created globalization, right? So if you think about transportation costs between Europe and Asia, or Europe and America 100 years ago, 150 years ago, this would be insurmountable for many people, and people would not be able to move there and back. That would be a luxury that only very rich people could afford. Now, educated professionals can move, and therefore, indeed, places which think about growth and development need to think how to retain talent and how to attract talented people. This is very new, and not all governments know that they actually need to do that. And this is actually the ultimate metric of success. If talented people come to you, if people who have a choice come to you, that means you're doing something right. If people who have a choice go somewhere else, that means you need to change something. And basically, what we see, and this is again a generational change, people value now when societies are becoming richer, and this is especially true for high-skilled people who are reasonably better off, people value not just income, because they already have income. People value their capacity for self-realization, for being able to implement their ideas, to carry on with their favorite lifetime project, which could be innovation, new technology, new business. And they also care about quality of life, capacity to have good schools for kids, quality of cultural environment. So all of those things matter for globally mobile talent. But I would say that what you are talking about, global talent, which is most relevant for economic growth, these are entrepreneurs and innovators and professionals that want to be able to implement what they want to implement. And this is where regulatory barriers are most dangerous. And for example, Europe now is rethinking its economic model, and there is this famous Draghi report, which is producing a lot of negative conclusions on recent decades of European integration, because Europe has not managed so far to create a real common market. There are common markets in various sectors, but we still don't have a real capital markets union. We still don't have really integrated market for services, and that fragmentation undermines capacity of Europe for innovation.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, this is the services directives that there's still operating under, where you know, I mean, they will move forward. I hope, at least within the current geopolitical environment, where they need to look inward. Now, one of the things that in attracting talent and all this, especially from cross-border, from outside, is that at the same, you know, at the time when governments are putting public money into innovation and all this, you know, how do you square it off with the idea that, you know, you're paying a foreigner to do this job out of a taxpayer's money, right? At the end of the day, this is a dilemma for a lot of policymakers, especially in this current, and I hate to go back to the current geopolitical environment, right? Because, and we saw it happening, you know, when the US came up with the own support for innovation and for all this within the United States, and then the response of Europe and all this, and the fear actually that I'm supporting, you know, foreign talent and foreign talent that are very mobile, that can cross border at any time. So how do we overcome this?
Right. I think you're pointing in a very important problem. So, say 20 years ago, people would not think about those issues because they trusted that we all work together for global prosperity. And if you're producing semiconductors, the market forces will make sure that we are in a win-win situation. You will sell semiconductors to me. I don't need to worry that semiconductors are not produced on my soil. And now with this increase in mistrust between nations and geopolitical competition and a potential new Cold War, we see how countries are saying we need to do friendshoring. We need to produce stuff that is important for our national security in case we actually go to a hot war. Needs to be produced in our on our soil within our borders. That creates a lot of fragmentation and inefficiencies. That's actually an implication of lower trust between countries, and this is very sad. And this is not just this party or that party in the United States. We saw that the previous administration, for example, Biden administration, pushed forward, as you said, Inflation Reduction Act, which included certain reshoring initiatives. Some people would say violating World Trade Organization's rules. And Europe was taken aback by those initiatives, seeing how investment in green technology was actually done in a way that undermined the alliance between Europe and the United States. So this lack of global cooperation slows down our capacity to address issues of development and fighting climate change. And this is actually very, very sad. But answering your question, every government needs to make this call, right? If I lack domestic talent, if I lack domestic capacity and capability, would paying a foreigner, bringing in a foreigner, be better off for me, for my future economic growth, for incomes of my own citizens? And if we forget those geopolitical issues, my answer would be, in most cases, yes. You mentioned I worked in the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. One of the huge successes of EBRD was transition to sustainable market economy in Central and Eastern Europe. These countries were lower middle countries, middle-income countries. Many of them are now high-income countries. Poland is an economic powerhouse, which has been growing at 3 or 4% per year for 30 years. It's now 3 times as rich as it used to be. And this all has been done through foreign direct investment. These countries created incentives for Western corporates to come in, build new factories, build new offices, new businesses, and Central European countries benefited from this investment. So I still believe in economics helping both sides, because in economics, usually you don't have coercion. So if I buy something from you, it's because I benefit and you benefit.
Wow, what an insight. I'm going to quote you on this one. I'm going to quote you on this one. Now made me think, the competition for talent, the global competition on talent. Now, also added to it a competition over critical raw materials, and some raw materials, not just the critical ones, right? I mean, across the board. And competition over and issues related to food securities. They all come in, together to actually challenge the ability of, policymakers to react, and of course businesses at the end of the day, because they're the one who will navigate these, right? But from a policy perspective, how do you actually navigate and then, protect or encourage or support your businesses that now are called upon to redesign, re-engineer their supply chains for raw materials, for critical raw materials, for talent too, right? And of course, for finance.
Right, it's a great question. We are having this conversation in Dubai, and I think the approach of United Arab Emirates is the approach where you don't have enemies. You don't want to have enemies. You want to be friends with everybody. You want to have agreements with everybody. You want to have deals with everybody, because, as I said, most deals are actually win-win deals. We are away. Most of us are away from 19th century's imperialism, and one country can force another country to make a deal. Some countries think they're in 19th century still, but hopefully, if you don't want to make enemies, you can still be friends. And I think this is the way forward. And you're right. You have supply chains issues, and you want to back up supply chains, which creates inefficiencies and duplication. After COVID, a lot of countries have said, look, I didn't have spare capacity to produce masks. Now I do have to have spare capacity. I need to have inventory of masks, and they expire. This is inefficient. We lose money on this, but because supply chains may be disrupted, I probably need to invest in duplication, which is sad, but I think we'll see more and more of that. To be resilient, you need to invest some additional resources and waste some resources just to back you up. Overall, globally, if you think about this, the world is as prosperous as ever. We've never been in the global society with such high incomes and such low global poverty. When we talk about food security, it's really sad because we do have enough food to avoid famines anywhere, everywhere. Just to give you a metric, 40 years ago, 45 years ago, almost 50% of global population lived in extreme poverty. That is, in today's money, less than $2 a day. Now, in 2025, this number is at 8%. So we've made a lot of progress on prosperity, incomes, food availability. But because of political and geopolitical issues, sometimes these issues come up and people actually worry about food security. You're right.
Yeah, and I worry about, this shift from a just-in-time type of a global engagement to a just-in-case.
Exactly.
Right? So I'm no longer concerned as a business, let's say, about costs, but I am really concerned about resilience, right? So how exposed am I to the risk of ABC events happening outside my borders and beyond? And this is the real thing, right? So from my perspective, I don't know your view, Sergei. Looking ahead, we're seeing a redesign or redefinition or whatever you call it of globalization, because globalization is here to stay, right? The free movements of goods, of people, of services, of ideas, of technologies across borders. That we know. I mean, how the benefits it gives us. Maybe it's interrupted. Maybe now we're moving into a just-in-case type of a scenario, right? So what would it take? I mean, what countermeasures can now be deployed to actually stand in this against this wave?
Right. I agree with you that globalization is here to stay because globalization is delivering enormous benefits. I mentioned decline in global poverty. If we think about countries like India and China who pulled hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, if we think about the country like United Arab Emirates, which is now one of the richest countries in the world, because of globalization, this country would not be able to build what it is now without cooperating with the rest of the world. So we know that globalization is here to stay. Some people are saying that it is in retreat. It's actually, if you look at metrics, which is global exports to global GDP, global trade to global GDP, it is stagnating after global financial crisis 2008, 2009, but it's stagnating at a very high level. Never before we've seen this level of trade integration, financial integration, service market integration, which is very important. You mentioned global talent. It's very hard to measure trade in services because sometimes it's trade in tasks, right? You're not paying me for this podcast, but this podcast is creating value. This is a service we are doing to the world. How do we account for this service, right? Which statistics office records this value added? It's very hard to measure. Am I based here or I'm based to London? All these statistical issues are very hard to address when we talk about services, especially free services, but also cross-border services, paid or free. So in that sense, I remain optimistic, even though we don't measure increase in trade and cooperation. There is much more trade and cooperation because of digital technology. You now can give a talk from here to your audience in the US, you can charge for the stock, or you can provide advice being based here to your US clients. And this is a service, it's trade in services, it's very hard to measure. So all of those things are complex, and it's definitely developing, especially rapidly after COVID. So this suggests that globalization always finds an opportunity to circumvent new and new barriers. Yet I would not underestimate the problem, because today we are likely to have the biggest economy in the world, United States, erecting 10% barrier with imports from everywhere. And the previous average tariff just 10 years ago would be 1%, and recently 3%. So we are going into uncharted territory. We've never seen tariffs as high in a such globalized world. So I'm very uncertain about what's going to happen. I don't really know. But I think the economic pressure to cooperate and globalize and trade and finance cross-border and exchange ideas cross-border will prevail.
Thank you so very much. I may want to ask you one last question. What kind of thought, an insight that you want to leave policymakers, young economists in the region, and of course students, coming from your experience, Sergei?
So we talked about different kinds of institutions and what governments can do. I think one of the most important ideas in modern economics is the new Schumpeterian growth paradigm and creative destruction paradigm developed by Peter Howitt and Philippe Aghion. And the idea is there are stages of growth. In the first stage, when you move from low level of development to middle level of development, you need to invest in physical capital, in infrastructure, and that's reasonably easy to do top down. But then to go from middle level to frontier level of productivity, you need to innovate. And this research shows, and we actually have a paper with Philippe Aghion on South Korea's transition from industrial to post-industrial economy. This transition takes institutional change. We talked about institutions. You need to build a different set of institutions which promote innovation, initiative. And for that, you need openness and competition, decentralized systems rather than top-down systems. And for young people, that means that if they want to achieve their life dreams, they need to look for environments which are conducive to decentralized innovation, openness, freedom. And for governments, if they want to attract such people, they want to think about creating this environment where people from all around the world can come and prosper and try out new things. And I think this is something to bear in mind. The models from the past may not work in the future. And the change is always difficult, especially institutional change, especially change from what used to be so successful. And in this paper with Philippe Aghion and Kanchul Jo, we talk about Korean experience, where Korean top-down model overstayed its welcome in the 1990s, and then there was an Asian crisis, and this crisis helped the elites understand that they need change. And this change happened, and Korea reinvented itself as an innovative economy. Some big conglomerates had to close down. Some big conglomerates, like Samsung, reinvented themselves and became global leaders in knowledge-intensive sectors in innovation. And so this is a great example for other countries how to transition from past successes to new frontiers.
And for young economists also.
And for young economists as well.
Yeah, thank you so very much for your time and for your insights. That was, a great way to actually do our podcasts and our outreach activities within a, an open forum where we want to promote open dialogue, new ideas, and discussions in here. So thank you so much for your visit. Thank you for your time and all your insights. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Raed. Always happy to be with Whiteshield.
Thank you.